2 years ago, the army seized power, killing an estimated 3,000 pro-democracy demonstrators on the streets of Rangoon. If the army's puppet party wins as expected this Sunday, the students have said they will rise again. Burma's paradise lost. That's our story tonight.
Live from Sydney, the ABC's Lateline. Here's Kelly O'Brien.
Welcome to the program. Ripping down the forests is one of the few industries that's flourishing in Burma. Another is the opium trade, which supplies nearly half of Australia's heroin. Not that this has helped Burma's 38 million people, who've seen their economy, one of the richest in Asia, collapse to be one of the poorest. The absolute ruler is General Ne Win. Although officially retired, he still dominates the army, which governs in a style foreign diplomats describe as uneducated and brutal. Certainly, the army are taking no chances in this Sunday's election, the first in 28 years. The country has drawn the curtains, as all foreigners, including journalists, have been banned. There will probably be no outside observers during this election period, and access of any kind has been severely limited since the army crushed the pro-democracy movement in September 1988. Those reports that do get out describe a people living in fear of torture camps, of political prisoners numbering upwards of 8,000, and a place where opposition leaders are either in jail or under house arrest. We start our program tonight with one of those rare glimpses inside Burma. Our reporter Tony Jones has compiled this report from film shot secretly by a Scottish freelance journalist posing as a tourist.
I have to tell you, I've got quite a bit of experience filming in Eastern Europe long before the walls came down and the doors opened. And in all my experience, I've never seen a more frightened people than the Burmese. They are so frightened. They're a lovely people, a lovely, friendly people, but they live in fear of the army.
For the people of Burma today, prayer is one of the few safe ways of expressing their thoughts. Most other outlets are forbidden to them. Burma is soon to have the most important election in its history, but it's taking place in a climate of fear. The Western media are banned from the country, so the material in this program was filmed secretly with a home video camera. To gather these impressions of a virtually invisible election campaign, London-based journalist Jamie Doran posed as a tourist.
As one of the opposition leaders said to us, it's an election campaign being run with tape over their mouths. They're not able to speak openly. They're not able to go out in the streets campaigning. If you wear a T-shirt or a badge, you're arrested. Everything is behind closed doors.
Aung San Suu Kyi, the country's leading opposition figure, has been under house arrest since last July. The daughter of General Aung San, the hero of Burma's struggle for independence, she is idolised by the people, but feared and hated by the army.
She's not allowed to go outside her doors. We were taken by a very brave young man past Aung San Suu Kyi's house, and you can see the army's presence there all the time.
She returned to Burma in April 1988, her presence perhaps helping to trigger the first significant anti-government demonstrations in 40 years. The demonstrations began with students, but thousands soon joined a popular insurrection that came long before those in China and Eastern Europe. When the regime appeared likely to topple, it began to make concessions. Socialism was officially abandoned and multi-party elections promised. But later that year, the army seized power in a coup. In the streets of the capital, thousands were reported killed. In Burma today, the army is still pulling the strings. Their message is everywhere.
On the train from Rangoon to Mandalay, a soldier comes up to us, sits down beside us, just forces his way into our company, pulls his gun and says, "We will win the election. This is why. We have the power. The people are frightened of us." In the villages, the few people we managed to speak to there, one of the leaders, he said, you know, I don't know how the election will go, but I know that our village will vote for the government. And I asked him why, and he said, because they'll burn it down if we don't.
The military intelligence wing of the army pays for a network of informants to constantly monitor opposition activity. Only rarely does one see evidence in the streets of the National League for Democracy. But although it operates under intolerable conditions, the NLD is not completely paralysed.
We decided to take a risk and go to the NLD headquarters in the full knowledge that military intelligence would know exactly what the game was by then. When we arrived, we came to this building and you would think that nothing was happening there. And then you walk in and there are hundreds of people running a campaign from behind these walls that they can't take outside. When we got there at first, they looked at us as if, my God, who are you? And when we just said, Western journalists, they grabbed us, rushed us inside behind the walls and sat us down. It was as if men from Mars had arrived. And one man burst into tears saying that, you know, at last someone knows there's an election on, at last someone knows we're here.
Burma's hopeful Democrats gather here to plan their campaign, surrounded by pictures of their leader. They continue to print and distribute election material, in spite of growing evidence that key opponents of the regime are being arrested and tortured. Amnesty International last week reported that there are now 19 torture centres throughout the country. Under such conditions, few people were willing to be interviewed. But outside Rangoon, one NLD candidate did speak on condition that his identity was not revealed.
We believe in democracy and we believe in the leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi. If she is free, we will win enormously. But because of the current constraints, we think we will have some difficulties. We are fighting for democracy because our country is staying back. Our cottage industries are almost broken by socialist programs and socialist ideologies. They have their MIs, military intelligence, everywhere. If we are against them, they will take me secretly, and anyone who are against them, they are taking secretly. So it is very difficult to protest.
And just after that bit of interview, the guy suddenly realised what he'd said, stood up and ran out the door. When we went downstairs, which had been full of people just 20 minutes before, there wasn't a single person on, the doors were wide open, the lights were still on, and there wasn't a single person left.
Since the military takeover and the repression that followed, thousands of Burmese students fled to the jungles of the Golden Triangle to fight against the army. Here, the tributaries of the Mekong River serve as a network for supply and communication.
We were taken back into Burma through the jungle to Ong Ham Rai camp, which is the only all-student camp base in Burma, where we found quite a motley group of absolutely determined people who were ready to take on the Burmese army and indeed had done.
I don't want to go back to Burma. I decided already. So when we can get the true democracy, not ordinary democracy, true democracy, we want to get a true democracy, and we can restore the democracy in our motherland. It is end of our duty.
Though the student fighters were keen to display their defiance to the world, in truth they are poorly trained and badly equipped to fight a guerrilla war. But now, in the lead up to the election, many of the students say they're moving back to the towns and cities.
They're now talking to the people in the towns and the cities, and also in some of the villages they came from themselves, to try and tell them, to convince the people that they don't have to fear the army, that there is, you know, an alternative, and that they shouldn't vote for Ne Win's party or So Mong or whoever it happens to be, in other words, the army. They shouldn't vote for the army out of fear because there is an alternative. In truth, they don't stand a chance.
What did they tell you they plan to do if they found or believed the election to be rigged?
There will be an uprising. They were categorical about it. They will take up their arms. They will go out to where they've hidden their guns and come back and attack the army.
And what will happen to them in your belief?
They'll be massacred.
That rather compelling report was compiled by Tony Jones. Gary Woodard is now a political scientist at Melbourne University, but he was Australia's ambassador to Burma for 3 years in the 70s. Dr. Than Lewin, a Sydney psychiatrist, is chairman of the Committee for Democracy in Burma. He was arrested himself in the 1962 student uprisings in Burma Although he didn't leave the country until some 10 years later, he maintains close ties with Burma and has recently returned from a meeting with Burmese students on the Thai border. He was taking clothes and medical supplies to them. So, Dr. Lewin, what are your feelings, what are your reactions to that film? Is there anything in that that does not ring true, or is it not bleak enough?
As expected, Gary, that oppression, the secrecy, the fear for the military intelligence, it's nothing new to me. It hasn't changed. When I was there, it's almost the same. Because of my past records, they follow me around. There's always a jeep parked not far from my house. So it's the same, hasn't changed.
You and other dissidents have been urging a boycott in this election.
That's true.
If the Burmese are as frightened as you would say they are, and as that report says they are, then presumably they're not going to buck the system, are they?
No, they won't buck the system, but they are still bucking the system in a very passive-aggressive way. They're still holding hopes that NLD will come out in front, provided the votes are not rigged, provided they don't threaten the voters or push them away from presenting. And as you know, they're not going to announce the percentage of votes that has been voted. They're just going to announce the candidate who won 3 weeks after. So we still think there's a chance that NLD might pull through. But of course, there could be a hung parliament where, as you know, 93 parties are registered. This is the letter I received, a copy I received from the ambassador in Canberra. 2,392 candidates are enrolled. NUP, the previous Socialist Program Party, has 492 candidates. That leaves 1,900 candidates and 92 parties where 83 independent parties. So you can just imagine the breakdown. So I can see a hung parliament.
But how are we outside of Burma to judge the result of that election if in fact there are no independent observers of the process?
There's no way anyone can judge, because you can see the election laws, the way it has been posed. Like 34A states that if there's only one candidate, there won't be any election. He will be automatically admitted into the parliament. He doesn't need eligibility vote. He doesn't need any consensus. Then, of course, there's 288, which restricts electioneering. There's 289, it's a Summary Offence Act where military tribunal will try you. And then 389, no publication unless it is censored by the SLOG. This is the State Law and Order Restoration Committee, and you can't print anything that criticizes SLOG. Then there is this 390, which says that any party with less than 3 candidates will be automatically deregistered. There's 8 election law 8, 9, 10, 11, which qualifies.
In other words, it's a stacked deck.
That's right. That's right.
Now,
So
you've just come back from Thailand, and you've been talking with student leaders in camps on the border.
that's right.
What are they saying to you about what they're going to do after the election if they are convinced that it was not fair?
Well, they want to wait and see. So also the Democratic Alliance Burma, this is the 23-party combined group, including the ethnic minorities and including All Burma Student Democratic Front. They want to wait. They won't interfere with the election. They want to wait. And if the result turns out to be what it is not a fair and free election, I mean, with the fingers crossed, they are willing to take up arms. They do not think there's going to be a gentle transfer of power like any democratic country should. So they will take up arms. That's what they're going to do.
But they were squashed in '88, and the same would happen again, wouldn't it?
Well, they said they have already given up their bodies and life for this revolution. So they said they rather die than be under the hobnailed boots of a military oppressor. So this is what they've told me.
Gary Woodard, on a scale of 1 to 10, and this is obviously not a flippant question, but on a scale of 1 to 10 in the terms of human rights abuse, where does Burma figure against some other well-known abusers around the world?
Well, Representative Stephen Sullard said in Congress last September that it was one of the most repressive and xenophobic regimes in the history of mankind. Now, my history is not good enough to know whether that's a fair judgment or not, but in the 1 to 10 scale of countries existing at this moment, Burma is pretty close to what Romania was under Ceausescu's day.
You've been critical of Australia in its handling of of our attitude to Burma after the '88 uprising. Why?
Well, we missed chances then, and I think we really stuffed it up. In September of 1988, we didn't join the aid boycott for a couple of weeks after Japan, the United States and Western European countries had announced it. And then we were first off the boat in January 1989, which then gave some justification for Japan also to resume some aid projects in February 1989. And also in November 1988, we were the first country to break the boycott on dealings with the military regime and to have official dealings with them, which gave them a measure of respectability. Now, I think those two actions on our part were wrong and definitely greatly assisted the regime in its desperate efforts to establish itself after the massacres in September of that year.
The Hawke government rather prides itself on its record in terms of protests to human rights abusers. And not far away from Burma, we see Gareth Evans struggling mightily to assist in the peace process in Cambodia. You're saying that that whole thing just sits inconsistently, aren't you? Why?
There's a bit of inconsistency in the human rights area anyway, as the government itself acknowledges. With some countries we can do more than with others. But in this case, there were mistakes made. There were basic misjudgments made about the nature of the Burmese regime. And I think, therefore, that we have to say that in Burma we made a mess of our, on the whole, admirably consistent attempts to be in the forefront of human rights.
When people like Daniel Moynihan and Teddy Kennedy talk about economic and trade sanctions, should Australia be making the same noises or not?
Well, we have economic sanctions in the sense that we aren't resuming any other aid project. We only have one going at the moment, and there are no new aid projects envisaged. So to that extent, there is an economic sanction. But there are no economic sanctions on the activities of business, and that does seem a little illogical if the government is applying certain economic sanctions, that it can't also do something about trade and about Australian investment in Burma.
Dr. Lewin, how do you feel about the fact that Thailand, which decides that it's irresponsible environmentally to continue logging its own forests, is happily dealing with the Burmese regime, taking timber out of Burma, selling it to countries like Australia? And how do you feel about the fact that a corporation like BHP is in there looking for oil?
We approached the Royal Thai government even from November '88. First of all, regarding the students, regarding 3,000 students that has ran away into Thai territory, we wrote to them about looking after them, or perhaps handing over them to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. But the King replied a letter to me, which I've got it here, that Royal Highness has approached the Prime Minister and appropriate departments to look after the student on humanitarian ground. Nothing has been done. They haven't even allowed these students to be refugees. They are just displaced people, one. Two, from November '88, their forestation has dropped down to 24%. So their parliament stopped all logging in Thailand. And the minute it was decided, Shawalit flew across to the border to Burma, gave presents to all those generals, and made a deal. And Burmese government, this military regime, fire sale all the resources, and we're not very happy about it. And we've made approaches to the Prime Minister of Thailand, but they seem to be saying, we politicians understood what you are talking about, but it's the military, so they're passing the buck around.
Do you accept that Western business people should still trade, should still do business with Burma? I mean, no. business goes on in the rest of the world, basically.
Well, let's face it, I have written to the chairman of BHP, Mr. Arvo, Sir Arvo, and what he has replied to me was, there's no constraints been put on by the Australian government regarding investment by private business in Australia. There's no guidelines. So we have approached the Prime Minister, and he hasn't given us an interview. He said he's sick, we understood, but he has a tight schedule. We want the Australian government to have a guideline. Burma has been rubbished by the United Nations Human Rights Commission in February 1990 this year. I was there under procedure 1503 special investigators are going to go into Burma to look at the continued human right violation. Burmese government, I don't think, has agreed to allow this investigator to go in, and that kind of sanction has not even put on South Africa. So this is a country worse than South Africa. We want some sort of sanction to be applied on Burma.
Very briefly, Gary Woodard, is there anything more that the Australian government can do that it hasn't done? I mean, what is important to do now?
Okay, well now on the human rights aspect, I think it's back on track and it's working in concert with other like-minded governments as one would normally expect it to do. But first of all, there are Burmese students in Australia who are in danger of being sent back to Burma at the request of the government and other Burmese in Australia. They should be told that they will not be sent back to Burma against their will, just as Chinese students in Australia have that undertaking. Secondly, for the refugees on the border, we should take an international initiative to set up a United Nations border relief operation in the same way as there is one on the other side of Thailand to deal with Cambodian refugees. And thirdly, we should make it quite clear that we will not resume any aid to Burma until there are free and fair elections or until that United Nations Special Rapporteur reports favourably on Burma, which certainly won't be in the next year or two.
Dr. Lewin, Gary Woodard, thanks very much for talking with us.
Thank you.